I'm sure all of you have your favorite game franchises that you always keep in the back of your mind, and even ones that probably changed your life. But have you ever stopped to consider that what if this game never even existed in the first place because of the series doing poorly? That's basically the gist of what I'm going to be talking about today. Just some IPs that were practically lying on their deathbed, but then released a game that reinvented and revitalized the series for the better. And in some cases, even saved the company that made those games. For example, let's just say Mario 2 did really bad, but then Mario 3 came out, breathed new life into the series, saving Nintendo. Didn't happen, just hypothetically speaking, of course. But yeah, you get the point. Let's just get into it. Final Fantasy. I'm sure a few of you are big Final Fantasy fans out there, but what if I told you not only did it almost die early, but it actually wasn't even supposed to be a series, and it almost never even got a second entry. The crazy thing about this is that not only is that true, but it's also the entire reason that the game was called Final Fantasy. According to this Wired article that will be linked in the description, this was actually a debate between Hironobu Sakaguchi, sorry if I'm saying the name wrong, who is the father of Final Fantasy, and Nobuo Uematsu, the composer. Sakaguchi said in multiple interviews that the name derived from him planning to go back to college and quit game development, which, as the father of the game, you would think that that's the tried and true answer, but Uematsu actually says otherwise and says the game's name derives from Square Enix almost going bankrupt, and the designers believing that this was going to be their swan song. Obviously, with the series having a total of 16 mainline entries and 100 plus total entries if you count everything, which is fucking wild, and also being one of the longest running series to date, neither of these things ended up happening as Sakaguchi continued to work on the series for a while after FF1's success, and Square is doing great still, thanks to FF14. But yeah, they show zero signs of bankruptcy, and they're not gonna show any signs for a long time. But yeah, I don't think JRPGs would be the same today without Final Fantasy, as it's one of the most iconic series to date, and it's reinvented the wheel many times throughout all its entries, and even set a new precedent for music in games, in my opinion, with Uematsu's amazing work. And Soken's too, of course. Now this and the next one I will talk about are sort of linked in a way, I guess. So I'm going to start with this one first. So yeah, Sonic Adventure 2, one of the most critically acclaimed and fan favorite Sonic games. But did you know it was almost not only the final Sonic game, but it was almost Sega's final game as well. In the 1990s, Sega was absolutely thriving. They were dominating the arcade scene and also found large success in Sonic the Hedgehog 1. With, believe it or not, Sonic being more recognizable to American children than Mickey fucking Mouse, which nowadays is an absolutely crazy thought. Yeah, long story short, Sega was absolutely killing it, and was neck and neck with Nintendo for a time. But unfortunately, the Saturn was heavily outperformed by the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation, and Sega was not doing great after this, and with a last-ditch effort, released the Dreamcast, which also did not do great. But Sonic Adventure 1 released and did super well for them, but simply wasn't enough to keep consoles flowing. So, in yet another last-ditch effort, they released Sonic Adventure 2 a few years later, which was basically the final push for the whole company, and lucky for them, it did really fucking good. Sonic Adventure 2 went on to receive critical acclaim for basically everyone and redefined how 3D platformers could play, with speed being the main focus, much like Sega did with Sonic 1 and 2D platformers. Sadly, even with all the success, it was not enough to keep Sega making consoles, and they then ported Adventure 2 to other platforms and halted console development and just became a developer, publisher for the foreseeable future, which they still remain as today. But yeah, without Adventure 2, it's hard to say if Sega would even still be making games anymore, and we can definitely say that it would have changed Sonic's future quite a bit had the game not done well. With it being possible that it could have been a franchise maybe similar to Jet Set or something, and not see entries, like, basically at all, which, surprisingly, we are actually seeing another entry in the Jet Set fucking franchise, so we win. But yeah, Sega/Atlas and Sonic Team are my favorite devs in the industry, and I can confidently say that I would not be the same person without these games, and especially on the Atlas side of things. Speaking of Atlas, now, if you don't know already, Atlas is a subsidiary of Sega, so their fates are quite linked together, which is what I was mentioning before. Therefore, if Sonic Adventure 2 did not do so well, it's not hard to imagine that Atlas's many great titles may have never even existed. And the one I'm going to be focusing on today is Persona 3, my personal favorite game of all time. The story behind this game is actually pretty interesting because this is a new revelation, with the article detailing what I will talk about today being only from August of this year. So basically, the game story is actually quite similar to Sonic Adventure 2's, without all the console shenanigans, of course. But yeah, according to Katsura Hashino, sorry once again if I'm fucking up the name, that's the game's director, by the way, Atlas was on the verge of collapse and was told that this game could very well be their final game. With this knowledge, Hashino knew that making a similar game to Persona 1 and 2 simply was not going to cut it, and that they would need to also pull in new fans and old fans alike, with his direct quote being, "If we make a game that just makes the intense fans happy, how will it attract new people? The company will disappear." With this mindset at the forefront of his thoughts, he proposed new systems that nowadays are staples of Persona. One of them being the fabled calendar system, in which you physically live out every single day in about the course of a year-ish for Persona 3, 4, and 5, and let's be honest, most likely 6. Whenever that comes around. Which, in my opinion, increases immersion in these games so much because it does actually feel like you're living a day-to-day life, and when you have to say goodbye to the game, it hits you even harder. Hashino proposing this idea to the staff was actually met with quite a bit of worry though, which honestly is quite understandable because it was a very, very risky thing to do at the time, but ultimately they did decide to implement it, and it paid off for them amazingly, with Persona 3 being the best-selling Persona game in the series at the time, and doubling the previous record. The game tackles themes such as death and what it truly means to live, which resonated with many, many people, including myself, and I've even seen comments saying that this game saved their life. And that they would not be here today without it, which is absolutely amazing, and it's so beautiful that a piece of art can do that for someone. Even cooler to me too that they chose to go with those themes, because the company was face to face with death themselves at the time, and they ultimately overcame it by taking risks, which is extremely fitting. And it's pretty clear that Persona 5, which is by far the best-selling game in the series, and even giving it much critical acclaim and sales in the West, which was relatively new for Atlus, would not exist without Persona 3, and I find that pretty beautiful. NieR Automata. For those of you who don't know, NieR Automata is actually a sequel to a game, shockingly, called NieR, which later had a release by the title of NieR Gestalt. The thing about this game is it did not sell really good, only selling roughly 500k copies, including both releases of the game. Usually when this happens for a semi-higher budget game, the series will usually be left in the dust. And that was indeed looking to be the case, with Square originally showing zero interest in a sequel, and with it already being a spin-off to an even debatably weirder series, Drakengard, I don't exactly blame Square for it. According to Yoko Taro, the series creative director, Square actually came up to him and said, well, it didn't sell very well, sorry, but we can't make another one. Which, as someone who already had plans to make a sequel, must have been pretty heartbreaking for him to hear. Skip forward in time though, and an interesting trailer was shown at E3 2017, RIP E3 by the way, detailing some very amazing art and a collaboration with Platinum Games, who is famous for designing the gameplay on Metal Gear Rising and Bayonetta and many more, which had everyone really excited. Lo and behold, we reach the end of the trailer, and all we see is the title NieR, with the rest of it being obscured. There it was. A game which should have been an impossible game and an impossible sequel was finally revealed to the public. So, clearly Square changed their mind. As to why they did, we aren't 100% sure, but all we knew was that they wanted to create something that was truly different and unique, and not only to the original game, but also just to gaming in general. Luckily for them, the decision was possibly one of Square's best, receiving absolutely insanely high scores and critical acclaim, to the point where it was hard to find anyone saying anything bad about the game. Not only that, but this game sold crazy fucking good, shipping 7 million units, which is 14 times the sales of the original game, which is crazy. And to put the cherry on top, a few years later, a remake of the original NieR released and received about the same acclaim as Automata, only selling around 1 million units, which is pretty good and still double of the original. But that also took NieR's total sales up to 8.5 million, which for a series that didn't even come close to breaking 1 million originally is mind-blowing. Really glad that Square ultimately decided that NieR was something that was worth it for them, and clearly they are glad as well, with them greenlighting yet another NieR game just recently. There's many more games out there with similar stories that I would love to cover, but I mostly just want to talk about the games and franchises that are near and dear to my heart, which actually all happen to have success stories like this to share. Hope you're able to learn something new in this video, and if not, the one thing you can take from all this is that at the end of the day, it is always worth it to take a risk and do something that wouldn't be considered safe, because often it actually has far more benefits for you than taking the safe route could ever dream of getting you. Thank you for watching.